In this week's show, we're discussing the principles and practice to create an SEMH inclusive school through curriculum, intervention and staff development. My guest this week is Clare Williams, the author and creator of Hamish and Milo Wellbeing Resources. Clare was a primary teacher, educational psychotherapist, author, speaker, advocate for children's mental health and wellbeing. She has worked in primary schools, mental health and education provisions and within CAMS. Clare has also been a senior trainer and supervisor for trauma-informed schools. Welcome to the show, Clare.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you, Dale.
You are welcome. One of the statistics you sent me as part of getting ready for the podcast is that 1 in 5 children and young people had a probable mental disorder in 2023. And this is not just children within SEND, this is 1 in 5 of all children. And this is staggering, and we're still not supporting children effectively and young people. The current arrangement seems to be that only when their mental health impacts their education are they supported, or more likely they're going to be put on a waiting list. This needs to change, doesn't it?
I think you're absolutely right with that. Just, we've got such growing numbers. I think you only have to turn on the news occasionally to hear the statistics around mental health for children and the fact that actually we really do have the opportunity to support them better in schools. It's not just about kind of sending them out to other services. It's how do we really support schools to support their social emotional development, to teach the curriculum around supporting children's development, giving them the social emotional literacy skills, as well as empowering the adults to be able to feel confident enough to meet the children's needs. That's not to say that there isn't a need for wider services, because I think a joined up approach is absolutely critical. But I do think that if we were able to focus on relational practice, we were able to develop curriculums around emotional health and well-being and teaching social emotional skills and empower those adults too, then we would be able to meet the needs of children much more effectively. I think we have got a long way to go, though. I think there have been, identified a need for change, more funding around supporting children's social emotional development in schools and their mental health. And I think that we are starting to see a tidal change, really, where there's a review of the curriculum. There's also been a very recent review of teaching assistants and the role that they have. And I really hope that they are given much more value, because I think the pastoral role is huge within schools, and there's not yet enough focus placed on this, and the adults aren't really getting the support around that, the kind of the training, and also the opportunity to work with qualitative resources and emotions curriculum. So I think there's a lot of work to be done, and I think that we've really got to find a way to change that trajectory and that kind of growing number of children with needs, with social and emotional needs.
I think we had the idea of a mental health lead in schools and all that money's gone into it, but it's kind of like we've ticked a box with that. There doesn't seem to be a plan with what's that going to do, because 1 in 5 children had a probable mental disorder. Mm-hmm. Large portion of them are not on the SEN register and are not going to be on the SEN register because they're academically doing fine. So that therefore doesn't fall under the remit of the SENCO until it starts to become an issue. But we have this mental health lead. That, in my head, that's your world. This is what the mental health lead is for. And there will be overlap with the SENCO, but in my head, that mental health lead, that role within the school, should be supporting all children and looking, as you said, what the curriculum looks like within the school for all children, not just waiting for kind of that child's educational performance or their attendance to become a problem that they're now behind in education, and now the SEN register, now we're waiting for CAMS. The mental health lead, I thought, was a start of initiative to stop that.
Yeah, I think the mental health lead is a really powerful opportunity, actually, to be able to look at what do we do in terms of the universal provision for children? How do we really support their PSHE? How do we give them the skills for life and learning? And then how do we identify those children that might have higher levels of anxiety or growing levels of anxiety, or may have dysregulated behaviour because of distress around expectation or worried about performance or fear of failure or those kind of things. And then also we do have a range of children with kind of more complex needs within their families, within the community, and that has an impact on their learning and their opportunity to really reach their own potential. So if we could utilise mental health leads, if we can work with support staff, teaching assistants and ELSAs, and really empower them and value them and give them the opportunity to work at intervention level, to kind of really be proactive in supporting children's needs before they become a statistic, like you've said, of on the risk of exclusion, or on the risk of being emotionally school-based avoidant, so that they're not being able to feel safe enough to come into school. We've got to look at a whole range of ways that we do this preemptive work and really enable the roles that we have in schools, mental health leads, TAs, ELSAs, that kind of support layer, to really ensure that we're giving children the best opportunity and for the best outcomes. Yeah.
Definitely. I think as soon as you hear kind of mental health, you're thinking of social and emotional mental health, you're immediately thinking of SEN, but it's not. Every child may need support around SEMH. You may actually have something going on at a point in time for that child where they need support. Yeah. It isn't purely an SEN thing, it is an every child thing. But hopefully for most children, they will not need support there. But depending on what's going on in their lives, as you said, what their home life is like and various other factors, they may need support. But yeah, I think it's kind of a confusing landscape of where does this fit in, what's the priority. And I think what schools like is they like a guidelines, they like a framework to follow. Yeah, they like to be told this is what we need to do, and this is the impact, this is the proven impact of us doing this. That will mean that by doing this, we're going to change, make a difference.
I think you've got to really, in this day and age, you've got to have an evidence base underpinning the work that you're doing. I think you've also got to be led by research so that it's really current. You've also, I do agree that schools like to have, a planned structure and a framework in order to ensure that they can then also measure impact and show the difference that something is making. And I think those are really, really critical factors, especially when you've got kind of people breathing down your neck to see what is the impact of if we put in intervention or if we are supporting children in a particular way. We need to know that it's going to work. We also need to know that there's a wider kind of impact of this, that it's not just within our school, that what's the kind of the outcome wider on generations of children, and are we really meeting their needs at universal level and intervention level. So I agree. I think it's important that schools have really robust materials that are evidence-based, but also that they have the training that kind of underpins that we're really supporting staff to develop their self-confidence, their professional awareness around SEMH, mental health and children's needs. But I think also we've got to recognise that there needs to be flexibility as well, because I think schools don't want to be done to. Children don't want to be done to. It's about, let's give them quality resources, quality training and also support to then be able to work with the best to meet the needs of their children at individual level, small group level, at curriculum level as well. So I think you're right, it's a complex issue. But I think we also do have to make sure that we've got an evidence-based and a research-led approach so that schools have confidence in them being able to meet the needs of children.
Definitely. And I think I'm just listening to you, I can imagine the mental health lead or someone on training going, right, we need to do this, we need to do this, we need to do this, a load of things, I can see the impact. But you've then got to convince the senior leaders that they've got to change a system which the senior leaders believe is working perfectly fine. And again, a framework helps you structure that kind of argument that actually I think we should do this. It goes against what we currently do, but actually here is some evidence.
Yeah.
Because that's the thing, is lots of schools, and you see it across the news, is, they just need to learn resilience. This is the way it was back in my day and all this sort of stuff, and we don't need to change. It's their fault. It's their problem. And it's just like, since when does that ever work in any situation other than in schools? Does anyone think, apart from maybe the armed services, is that a kind of the right attitude?
I think you are right in the sense that we've got to start with a kind of holistic approach. We want to make schools inclusive around understanding SEMH, and then having a range of resources, materials, approaches to be able to engage young people and to enable them to get the best out of their school experience. But you're right, we have to start with the culture of the school, and that's led from the top, isn't it? It's led from the senior leaders understanding. It's also about really setting a culture of relational practice. And the work that we do with Hamish and Milo is very much about looking at that holistic whole approach. It's about really empowering and harnessing senior leaders who want to ensure that children's social emotional needs are at the heart of everything they do, because we know that that has a longer term outcome for children's academic achievement, their engagement in learning in school, their peer relationships and friendships. And if senior leaders are empowered enough and empowering of their staff and really place their kind of focus on well-being as well as the curriculum and the other needs, then they're much more likely to have a greater outcome long term. So I think it is important that we focus on senior leaders, that we offer training for that we have opportunity for senior leaders to talk to each other about and understand relational practice. And then it's about then empowering them to give trust to those adults that are doing that day-to-day work and building children's confidence through SEMH intervention programs, through PSHE curriculums, through the culture and the relational practice that is every day, so that schools feel like safe places, engaging places, creative places, so that we're really enabling children to feel that they want to be at school rather than it's a place that's a fearful place or something that's going to mean that I can't achieve what I want to achieve. And that actually, we have more children, sadly, that are feeling scared about coming to school, that have pressure around having to achieve the expectations that are really beyond what they feel able to do. And we do have, sadly, as the statistics show, more children that are coping with adversity, coping with the cost of living, coping with the impact of COVID. And this is everyday experiences for these young people, and we need to be able to have schools that feel safe to come to, that enables those children to feel that they can thrive, that they can make relationships, that they can actually use the skills of being able to calm themselves down in order to be able to engage in learning. But the environment has to be set, the culture has to be set by the senior leaders, and then the relational kind of way that the staff are empowered to work and to engage children and families as well. I think the other thing is we've got to think wider about children's wider context, the communities, and how we enable parents to feel safe to come into school too, because that also has a huge impact on the trust between the children, the families and the school, and that partnership working, I think, is important. Yeah.
And if we look into, I think there's some research done not long ago, I'm not going to quote it on numbers, but I believe it was something like 60% of the time, it might be in a secondary school, was spent on dealing with behaviour. So out of all the issues, all the stuff the teachers had to do, the biggest part was managing behaviour. And it is you're reacting to things that have happened. And while you're reacting, you're using a lot of time. A reaction to something will always take more time than actually putting in that relational practice to begin with to avoid the problems, to remove the problems from even happening, and even communicating with parents to change it from battling those parents who are constantly emailing to actually a nice, positive relationship is going to save so much time, and it's going to completely change how teachers feel about their work, because if they're constantly battling children and battling parents, it's not going to be a nice job to be in. But if we can change that relationship between staff and children and staff and parents, that completely changes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there is a real shift here, and I think there is a more of a growing openness to think about trauma informed approaches, to be able to understand what's happening for children rather than going down a route of what's wrong with the child. I think we are sadly seeing higher levels of exclusions even in primary schools, which is absolutely shocking, when actually children are coming from a base of not having perhaps their social and emotional needs met earlier on, haven't had enough emotion coaching around being able to name and voice and think about and have permission to feel the feelings they're having. And then sadly, when we come to school, it's more about trying to manage and control behaviours rather than understanding where they're coming from, what the context is, and then understanding relational approaches, which have a much longer term better impact in terms of supporting children to feel regulated, to be able to then use social emotional skills. I think there needs to be a much greater emphasis around giving children the social emotional skills, much more emotion coaching, and helping staff in schools to understand what's happening as a result of the behaviour, rather than, trying to label and say what's wrong with the child as a result of the behaviour they're presenting. Any behaviour that is presented is a window into that child communicating very often an unmet need. And, if we then are only punishing the behaviour that we see, rather than saying, actually, where's the skill base that this child hasn't got, and what can we do in an intervention level to support their social emotional development, to support them to develop self-esteem, to support them to develop confidence, to help them to develop a kind of inner resilience. But you don't have resilience unless you have the relational space and the advocates to be able to support you to feel empowered about who you are and to be able to overcome obstacles. You can't do that alone. So we have to develop relational approaches. We have to give children and teach them the skills to learn how to self-regulate, but only if they've had enough experience of the adults that they're in their environment supporting them to recognize the triggers of what's happening for them, to be able to soothe and help co-regulate them. Only then, if they've had enough experience of that, can they then go on to regulate themselves. So we can't do this social emotional literacy without really robust approaches, teaching children well, having adults that are able to respond and understand behaviours, and then enable children to learn the skills and the strategies through that process. So it's much more complicated, I think. And I think we have to be brave enough to challenge schools and practice where we just look at a behaviourist viewpoint, because we have to understand what's happening for children and how do we give them the skills, the strategies, and the relational context to be able to then use this in life later on through time and their learning through their school experience.
Ali Knowles, one of our regular guests, constantly talks about if you spend ages upon ages dealing with behaviour, you're probably going to make no progress because that behaviour is caused by an emotion.
Absolutely.
And you have to work on the emotion to kind of reduce that behaviour. That behaviour doesn't just happen for no reason. There's something causing it.
Yeah.
And that, as you said, it might be not being able to read, not recognise. It might be something going on at home or something else in their life or various things, but there is an emotion causing that behaviour, and you have to kind of look past the behaviour and what is causing the emotion, what is the actual cause of it, and that's what you kind of got to have to work on, and the behaviour will kind of go on its own.
Yeah.
I know that sounds simple in the moment, and it's not obviously like that in the moment.
Yeah. I think it's about relationships as well, though, actually, because
Definitely.
children need to feel safe enough in the relationships they have with the key adults in school, to be able to know that whatever behaviour they present is going to be responded to and supported rather than reacted to. And I think that's a really different shift in terms of how we shape the culture and the practice of schools. So I think this relational approach is absolutely critical. And then it's about empowering the adults to be able to, like you say, look beyond the behaviour, understand what the kind of unmet need is and what's the emotion that's being kind of like played out, really forming in terms of then what do we do in order to support this child to best meet their best outcomes, really.
So we mentioned a framework. We've talked about a framework. And you sent me some Public Health England principles, which look very much like a framework. And we've talked, if you're scrolling through it, we've covered a lot of this, haven't we?
Yeah, absolutely. There are kind of 8 real key indicators from the Public Health England principles, which really do start around, the leadership and management, and how we really support senior leaders to have an awareness around social emotional development, prioritising children's wellbeing and mental health, and also setting the ethos and the culture. So you're absolutely right that that's kind of where it starts. And then there's a range of other principles and practice really that is about how we best support social and emotional and mental health within our schools and settings. Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things, whenever I look at a school's like their belief, their values, and their vision, you read it. A number of schools, and where I've talked to parents, and they're really struggling with their school, I often go, look at their values, look at their vision, use it against them, because generally it's like, we believe all children. Well, and what they're really saying is, we believe most children because they take too much time, and they have these values and they have these visions, but they mean most, not all. And you can see in the way some of the things they do where they're not really thinking about every child. Actually, they really need to think about. So if you have your values, your beliefs, and your vision in your school, are you thinking of it for every single child?
Yeah,
or are you thinking it like for the typical child? And as your school's getting more complex, how those values, beliefs, and vision should stay the same, but maybe what it looks like in practice should be changing.
Yeah, it's just brought to mind the kind of, I feel like I'm a million years old, but the Every Child Matters agenda, which was really about, really trying to place children at the heart. And I think we've got to come back round to that. So we've got to look at a kind of an approach where every child matters, mattering, belonging, children feeling that they are really safe and part of a social group and a community. I think that is really at the root of the values and the vision and the ethos of what we need to be creating. Relational practice, that real sense of togetherness, belonging. And I think there's a phrase which is about social connectedness. And I think that's one of the things that we really promote with the work that we're doing with Hamish and Milo, is just really about trying to enable children to feel safe within the relationships they have with the adults around them, but also their peers. I think there's a real opportunity, and through the work that we're doing, we're really trying to foster that peer group connection and that real sense of feeling that you are part of a whole community group. That's huge, I think.
I remember when I was a governor, they were talked about having a creative curriculum. And, we have a really creative curriculum between 1 and 2 on a Wednesday. And they say we have this, but it's shoehorned into a little box. And I think sometimes when schools talk about how inclusive they are, they tick off all these things they do, but is it really woven through everything they do? And my favourite definition of inclusion, it's not what you do, is does the child feel included? If you have a long list of things you're doing, but maybe you're not doing them well, maybe it's not woven throughout the entire school, maybe one teacher's doing it, it's finding out from the children and the parents, do you feel included?
Yeah, absolutely. It is that inclusivity, isn't it? And I think belonging is the key word for that. And, how do people feel within that relational context of the school? That has to be at the heart of it. Yeah, I think the other key thing there, and one of the other key principles, is about enabling children's voice to be heard. I think we often,
you're flying through these things. Children's voice. We're only just getting into 2 at the moment.
Sorry, I get overexcited, don't I?
Because we're already number 2 is ethos and environment, which is exactly what we're already talking about. And that comes from the leadership and management. They always set, as you said earlier, they set the tone, they set the direction. And what that looks like in the environment is always down to the leadership. But as we were just saying, that environment, not doing it in isolation, that kind of that inclusive, supportive mental health environment needs to be throughout the entire school, not a tokenistic bit at some point, or let's just do this because that way we tick a box. It should be woven throughout everything the school does.
Yeah, definitely.
Number 3 is curriculum and teaching and learning.
Yeah, so I think this, I have a background around PSHE, and I think that this is an area that is often kind of the one that's squeezed out in a curriculum, when there isn't enough time for it. And I think it's absolutely so vital that we have a taught curriculum around explicit PSHE, and the kind of the mental health and wellbeing strand, I think is absolutely vital. Well, all of it is really vital, but I do think that there are gaps around an emotions layer to that. But I think it's so important that we really do make sure that children are taught the social emotional skills around resilience, around friendship skills, how to, navigate friendships when they go wrong, in order to then, give you those skills for later on. Even intimate relationships, you learn the basics in friendship in your social emotional skills at primary school. How also do we enable children to develop, awareness around how to recognize the feelings that they have within them, angry feelings, frustrated feelings, nervous feelings? How do we give them all of that language? So I think it's absolutely vital that we do have really qualitative PSHE, and to really recognize that is the universal layer, and to recognize that all children deserve that. But of course, there are children that need additional, more targeted intervention too, which I know we'll come to. But I think it's really important to recognize that range, but also that all children deserve that taught curriculum around social emotional development.
I was at a friend's house recently and watching some TV with their children. We were watching the sickly sweet Hannah Montana.
Mm.
And I'm watching it going, God, this is so bad. But I'm watching it, and basically every episode deals with an issue. And I'm watching it, and this was basically in the episode, she was kind of putting off spending time with her dad and spending it with her friends, and actually the impact that had on her dad, and she didn't realise, and they all made up happy ever after. And I was like, and it was so sickly sweet. It was full on American, shiny everything, over the top, canned laughter. But I sat there and I saw that kind of, it's modelling a situation. It's telling you, look, sometimes you have this situation and you make a mistake unintentionally, but you apologise, you make up, and blah, blah, blah. And it's how you communicate this. Mm. And I realised that actually, generally, most children's TV has that kind of underlying message in every single episode. And then I've realised that as kind of mobile devices have come along, and as kids are watching YouTube or just watching Kinder Eggs being opened to see what toys inside, or random videos, whatever, they're now watching stuff without the underlying message. They're not having situations modelled for them in front of them on TV, and slowly learning through osmosis, this is how you deal with issues, this is what happens. And somebody might do something, they didn't mean it, but you need to forgive. All those complex things, I'm literally going, that's actually being missed out now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. Social media is hugely powerful, and if we can harness it in the right way, of course, it's what's going to lead us into the next centuries onwards and upwards. But actually, the huge dangers of that, and I think that again, it's even more vital that we have qualitative taught curriculum around social and emotional skills, scenarios, children having the opportunity to talk about real situations in their lives, because otherwise the only thing they see is the social media that's kind of, and the algorithms that really are giving them more of what we don't want them to have too often. So we have to find a way to make sure there's balance, that there is a real strong framework of taught curriculum in order to give children the opportunity to practice those skills, to be able to go through scenarios that are happening in the real world.
Yeah.
So it's even more vital that we have that balance.
Definitely. And it is just, you realise, like, lots of people will probably be, and it sounds from my age, lots of people will be impacted by Liam Payne from One Direction dying.
Yeah.
But I remember when I was at school, Kurt Cobain committing suicide. So you like, and I remember the impact people had on people. So if you loved One Direction, that would have a real impact. So actually, that is a real big learning opportunity to discuss how people feel, how it impacts everything. So there are things that happen in the real world that you can use as part of that. And you can look at maybe how people react on social media and go, is that something you would want to happen if this was in your family?
Yeah.
So there's lots of learning opportunities, isn't there?
Yeah, and mental health, and the risks if we don't do this well, the risks of suicide and, self harm, all of those kind of layers, which really are a way of saying that actually we're distressed and the world is a distressing place to be. And we've got to have the conversations and support children with such significant issues such as loss and bereavement, and being able to have safe conversations and being able to share their experiences. So I think that this is huge in terms of now how do we really make sure that we are giving children the best opportunities to develop that social and emotional skill base, really, to be able to then navigate a really, really complex and changing world.
Very complex. Life was so much simpler when we were young. Uh,
Oh,
well,
those are the days, eh?
those are the
I
days.
think it's still I think it was complex then. I just think it's a different kind of complex now.
Yeah. Mind you, I'm a boy, so life is very simple for us boys, isn't it? So
Sadly, I don't know that it is anymore. I don't think it is.
it's
I think the influences in the world are very, very complex for both boys and girls. And I think, we do get those messages, don't we, that it's not okay to show your emotions if you're a boy. I think we still do get that. And I think we see the long sadness outcome of that is high levels of suicide in men, young men. And again, if we don't give children, boys and girls, a voice to be able to articulate, name, and feel safe enough to talk about their emotions and their experiences, then we really are doing them a huge disservice. So yeah, it's a huge, huge, significant impact.
and talking of giving them a voice, element number 4 is enabling student voice.
Yeah, I think this is the other thing that I think often children feel very done to, and particularly if there's an SEMH need or SEN needs, there's protocols and practices that are put in place where things are done too. And I think, we don't always think about really what has happened for the young person, what's their perspective. And I think I remember being doing some training with some people that was with from kind of looking at children that were looked after, and saying that actually we sometimes do ask the questions that we want the answer, that we know the answers to, that we just want to hear the children say the answer, that we're asking the questions that we already know the answers to. We're just kind of giving children and feeding them that. And actually, how often do we really give them the means and the safety to talk about their experiences? And one of the things in Hamish and Milo, our whole kind of thing is about children feeling happier, heard and connected. And that's about being able to name and voice and feel safe enough to do that. And we use sock puppet pets, so that children have an opportunity to talk through in a therapeutic way through the voice of a puppet, which also gives them a means and a window to talk about their own lives and their own experiences. We've had people say that children are really verbalizing things they would have never verbalized before through using puppets. We have to also create a really safe environment so that children feel secure in a small group. In our intervention groups, that's one of the other key things. A small group with a key adult that they feel relationally connected with, and they're able then to explore and talk about things in a smaller group situation, because children in a big class group won't necessarily share as much as they might if they are in that kind of safe, secure kind of nurture environment. So I think that's one of the other things, that you have to create the right environment. You have to be able to give children a means and use the arts as well. So we use a lot of the arts in order to enable children to express themselves. So it might not be direct expression, it's more a means of showing us how a feeling might look like or how it might feel, rather than just using words, because again, sometimes children don't know how to express their experiences. So I think there's a whole way that we need to make sure that children's voices are heard, expressed, and that we are then able to respond to them so that they actually feel really listened to and valued.
And that's the thing. I think that final bit about listening and responding is, I think some schools forget that part.
Yeah.
Again, it's kind of, right, ask them what they want, ask them, we'll do school council, or we'll do this, we'll do that. They've given us the information, we're not going to do anything because we can't, and then we move on.
Yeah.
And if you're asking someone for their opinion and you do not listen, if a friend did that to you
Mm-hmm.
and then completely ignored what you said, you'd be like, yeah, I'm not really going to trust you again. I'm not going to open up to you again. So if you're asking your children to open up and to share, you have to respond. You have to respond to the information they're saying. You can't, if they ask for a swimming pool in the school, that's obviously not going to happen. But that is still a conversation you have and look through and work through and go through. But sometimes they might share something, and maybe there's an opportunity in the week, something happened, you could just check in on them.
Yeah.
That is feeling listened to. That is feeling heard. That is going, I matter.
Absolutely. And I think also we've got to listen to understand what they're feeling, rather than, sometimes we move into fix it mode, don't we? We try and fix something they've said, and we move on too quickly, rather than staying with and allowing them to feel that we've really heard and we've validated and we've empathized with their experience. And I think that is one of the most critical factors, how we really respond in that kind of empathic way, to show, my goodness, that feels so difficult, and I'm really glad you told me that feels really hard, rather than moving into that fix it mode straight away, because they absolutely need to know that you are listening and you are validating and you are understanding their perspective of that situation. So that's huge.
So you talk about moving into fix it mode. For us men, that is the only mode we're in. And it is quite hard when someone's telling you a problem to not just try and fix it.
Yeah.
And it's that real, I think Lorraine Peterson said at dinner one evening with a load of speakers, she was moaning about her husband. She was saying, why is it men just want to fix something? I just wanted to rant. And I'm sitting there going, oh, I wish someone told me that maybe 30 odd years earlier in my life, that you don't have to fix it. Perhaps sometimes you just have to sit there and actually listen and respond, and not fix a single thing, but them letting it out is all they actually wanted.
Absolutely. And sometimes we try to fix it because we want to move away from the sadness or the hard feeling and the painful feeling. And what we really need is for us to feel brave enough to stay with that feeling and with them in the experience of that feeling. And that's the powerful thing, isn't it? So it's also about recognizing that we move things on to try to fix it because it's painful and it's too difficult or uncomfortable for us. And actually, we've got to be able to sit alongside someone in their experience of a feeling or an experience or an emotion. Yeah.
Because in terms of like grief, I lost a cat recently, as we discussed off air previously, and how each person deals with that is different. And you don't want to kind of rush someone out of that. They will come out of it at their own time. They might go back into it, but it's got to be at their speed, and you just got to be there supporting them.
Yeah. I think that's a really important thing, that actually we do experience grief very individually, and it's a very painful process. But, we have a program called Memories and Me, which is a 10-week program around helping children with grief and loss. And actually, what we advocate is it's done in a small group, because actually sometimes if you have an experience that someone else has experienced something, even if it's similar, even slightly different, but the fact that someone else knows how you might feel, that sense of relief of knowing you're not alone in that feeling is such a healing process. And I think one of the kind of the research that we've been doing with the University of Bath into our programs is really that togetherness that children feel in a social context. I said it before, it's social connectedness, but that feeling of not being alone, and that others might have experienced what you've experienced is a really human thing that we all need. Otherwise, you're just left alone in your own grief. And that's a really dark, painful place to be. So it's getting it right with, supporting and being alongside, and that kind of sense of togetherness, whilst also respecting that everyone is on their own kind of journey with loss and grief when it's happening.
Definitely. I'm going to move on to, because we're already at 40 minutes of the podcast, so we've got to get through these. And we're only halfway through these 8 elements. So element number 5 is staff development.
Yeah, I think I've said this before, that, CPD is so vital. Really, ensuring that staff, and I think particularly pastoral staff who aren't always valued enough, they're not paid enough for the work that they're doing, sometimes with the most complex children with the most complex needs. I think we need to be giving really qualitative training around children's social emotional development, their mental health, how to respond to behaviours that might be presenting as a result of an unmet need. I think we need to empower their confidence. And again, at Hamish and Milo, we have a level 3 accredited training program now, which is really about trying to support that confidence for pastoral staff, TAs, ELSAs, mental health leads, to be able to understand children's emotional experience. But also it's rooted very much in our 10 themes. We've got 10 themes around resilience and self-esteem and loss and bereavement that I've said already, friendship, kind of diversity, and really celebrating inclusion, as well as understanding and supporting angry feelings. So there's a whole range, and I think we need to really empower staff to have the right training and support, sort of supervision as well, for if you're running kind of intervention work. It's so important that we are valuing staff, we're giving them knowledge and increasing confidence, and also placing value on the work that they're doing. So for me, staff development and training is vital.
And it kind of leads on to the next bit, that monitoring part. But with that staff development, if you're kind of going to do all this training on an area, you kind of have an intent of what you're trying to change. You're kind of having we want to change this, we want to be more like this. You do the CPD, then you should be looking at that impact of the CPD. Are we actually getting towards where we thought we were? It's not just when that CPD is finished, it's over. You really need to be looking at, is the impact happening? And if not, why not?
Yeah, absolutely. I do think that's vital. I think, but also it's really important that those staff feel supported ongoing, even after their training, which is why, again, we offer half-termly supervision. We offer a kind of network to be able to come together to think about individual children that you might be working with, thinking about the impact of the training and how that might have opened up ways of working, and then what the ongoing impact of that is. So I think it's really important that that's built in to a structure of supporting staff, longer term, rather than just, training that just might be a drop in the ocean, really. It's really vital that there's that really strategic approach in how we support staff.
Definitely. Number 6, I sound like I'm doing a chart show. In 6, identifying need and monitoring impact.
Yeah, I think that we do have the absolute moral obligation to look at children's needs, to then be able to look at what's the best approach that we can take to be able to meet their needs. We also need to have a framework of understanding how children are presenting and what those behaviours mean. And, we've developed a kind of digital dashboard. It's called Navigator, which is a way of really identifying children's social and emotional developmental needs through things like resilience and angry feelings and all of those kind of things. Where is the kind of gaps that children need supported in? And then how do we then offer the right intervention that then supports the skill development in that area? So potentially a kind of small group intervention around developing, support and strategies around anxiety or around supporting with loss, as we've already talked about. But then again, I think we need to be able to have kind of a way of measuring pre and post so that you can really see the difference in how those presenting behaviours are, how the child appears, what their kind of behaviours are as a result of having done the intervention. And as I said at the beginning, we have to be able to show evidence. We have to be able to show impact, and we need the right materials and the right tools. So our digital dashboard really seeks to present that so that you've got a robust way of showing pre and post measures. So I think it's something that schools have to be accountable to and make sure that they are meeting children's needs.
And I'm literally just thinking, because I know my wife and lots of schools use CPOMs.
Oh, yeah,
I always wonder when they're recording all these behaviour situations, recording all this information, is there actually a strategy to reduce it, or is it a case of, we just need to reduce behaviours? Is there actually a individual strategy, Probably, but is there kind of that whole school strategy where they're maybe looking at things over time and actually going, what is it as a school we need to do as a whole school to kind of reduce this and change things?
Gosh, that's a big question, isn't it? I
And
think
I'm going to just,
that's huge. It's a
I just,
hugely difficult question, really. I think, we have to have a strategic approach and training at staff level to understand how we recognize presenting behaviors, how we then have ways in which we've got a kind of range, a graduated response to be able to respond to presenting behaviors, and also knowing what is right to record. Because again, I think sometimes we can create an unhelpful kind of script around a child, behaviors that then are where the child is then judged rather than it being an indication of what the needs are being met. So I do think it has to be strategically understood. It also has to be that there are a range of ways of responding when you've begun to identify children, and that key interventions are then put in place in order to support that child and to make sure that their needs are being met. So yeah, that's a big question, but I think it's vital that we get this right.
to me, there should be, but there are lots of things where I talk to schools, ask a question, they're going, oh, we don't do that. Partly because you haven't got time and things like that, but it's one of the things that taking that step back and having a bigger overview and using that to inform change can reduce those smaller bits.
Yeah, definitely.
Number 7, targeted support.
Well, this is kind of where we really sit. Hamish and Milo is a set of 10 emotion theme programs that really sits along PSHE that really enhances the teaching and learning of social emotional skill development. So it is, as I've said, things like anxiety, angry feelings, loss and bereavement, resilience, looking at sadness, conflict resolution, and change and transition. So it's really targeted intervention support to then really build over time a way of really shaping those children's experience of the world, but also learning specific strategies and skills that then they can take back into the classroom, that they can then use at home, that are kind of transferable and really enable them to also have a greater understanding about their own emotional development, their own emotional regulation, and to be able to recognize their own triggers as well. So it's, I think, really important that we do have that enhanced layer that sits alongside PSHE that's much more targeted. It's part of your graduated support plan, and that we're really then enabling children to have real qualitative ways of developing their social emotional skills.
Definitely.
I think in the end as well, what you're aiming for is sort of less dysregulated behaviour. You're aiming for children to be engaged in their learning more. You're stopping them from feeling too anxious about coming to school. So there's such a wide breadth of how that will enhance their school experience.
And again, going back to my comment previously about the CPOMs, is
Mm.
that's where on an individual basis you'll be kind of hopefully seeing something, recognising something and going, okay, that's what we need to work on. It's not about increasing the behaviours or sanctions or anything like that. It's going, right, so they're struggling with this, let's do some work around that area.
Absolutely. It has to be needs-led, doesn't it? Needs-led, and then we offer the right intervention to get the right outcome for children.
Cool. And number 8 is working with parents and carers.
I think this is a huge area, and I think that we as schools need to really, really embrace this. Again, I think there's funding issues, there's capacity issues in schools, and I do recognise that. But I think parent partnership is such a key area where we can develop a dialogue around, and reduce the stigma around talking about mental health and well-being and children's social emotional needs. I think parents often feel blamed, and actually we've got to bring them alongside, bring them into the fold, help them to feel that they can come into schools, that they can have those conversations in a way that feels that they can have a trusted relational response from schools as well. And we, again, this is an area that we really wanted to focus in on, and we've developed a program called Families Together, which is a 10-week program and for parents, which gives them an insight into each of the Hamish and Milo themes, but also gives them a chance to be alongside their child and to do activities with their children too. So they're coming into the school, they're coming into the domain of the children, and not just focusing on phonics or maths, but actually thinking about the relationship they have with their children, understanding how to even support their children's self-esteem, thinking about how to build children's resilience, and all of those kind of areas that, I think many parents are crying out for, but they need to do it in a way that's not judged, that's actually about, let's work together with this, let's be collaboratively, let's build a network of parents and children that can come together and support each other and actually gain some insights into understanding a little bit more about some of these mental health concepts or social and emotional skills. And I think it's really important that we factor and we proactively support parents as part of the whole school community. But again, I think it's more than just a coffee morning. It's actually about, let's give them something that's qualitative and that builds on their social emotional knowledge as well, and empowers them to be able to develop those relationships and those skills with their children too.
One of the, I can't remember who it was, it might have been Angela Scott who said this, but it was asking the question, are you a school who is plonked in a community, or are you a school that is part of the community? Because that is very different. It's very different. And if you are in some way in an academy who is following that corporate identity and all the rules, and it's not working, then you are a school in a community. You're not part of it. You're not kind of meeting the needs of the parents or the children, or doing things they want, or doing things that's important to them. You are doing things for something else from somewhere else, which isn't related to anything going on in that local area. So you've got to think about, as a school, you really need to be meeting the needs of the families and the children, so that children want to come to school, their families are working with you, not against you, and you have those relationships that anyone can confide and build those relationships rather than going against. And there was in the news recently, there's a school somewhere who, I think if you have a diagnosis, you have to wear a lanyard to identify that you have a diagnosis. Did you see this article?
No, I didn't see that. Oh my gosh.
It was on BBC website, and it was basically, if you have a diagnosis of anything, if you have a special need, you have to wear a lanyard to identify that you have a special need. And you're like, where has that come from?
Wow, that's awful.
And you know that's not helping the parents, that's not helping the children. That is literally putting a big barrier between the school, the children, and the families. That's probably come from someone up high who had a great idea without actually asking anyone. Because that is a really stupid idea.
It is. And do you know what? I think schools have a real potential to be a real family and community hub. And I think where schools are able to harness that, and I get it, it's about, capacity and funding in the right places, and the right people in the right places. But I think schools can really, really bring parents in and give them the opportunity to signpost them to elsewhere, but also have kind of community, other multi-services within the school hubs. I think that is the way forward, really. The more we can kind of link that together and help schools become a real asset within the community, I think that we will have a much better outcome for our children and our families. Many parents are frightened of coming into schools or have had bad experiences themselves, but the key is how do we enable them to come and be part of their children's lives in schools, whilst we're also giving them the networks and the support beyond.
And definitely, we all know that when you have a good family and you're helping each other, you get more done together.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can all contribute a little bit. Everyone has less stress. Everyone saves a bit of time, and you get better outcomes when it's a great family. And that's what, as you said, schools should be aiming for, is working with the families, working with the children, being a school their children want to be at, that they feel valued, they have belonging, the parents feel welcome in the school. If you do all that, the workload you're going to save on those teachers is huge.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that thing, it sounds horrible that I've got to bring it back to that. You should be doing it, but we've got to think about that actually when you say things, we need to do this, we need to do this, they are thinking of workload.
Sure.
And they're trying to protect their staff. But you've got to see that actually what are your staff spending most of the time doing, dealing with behaviour, dealing with parents, things like that. How can we reduce that section? And it's by changing that ethos and making children feel like they belong in your school.
Absolutely.
Shall we wrap it up there?
Perfect.
Excellent. So, Claire's given me a load of links so you can find out more about Hamish and Milo, some research stuff, working with families, and loads of things like that. So, as always, they're all in the show notes, which you'll find on the website or wherever you listen to the podcast. So, thank you for coming on the show. I've really enjoyed it.
Oh, it's been great. I've really enjoyed talking to you. It's just lovely to have the opportunity to share all of that real belief in how we make schools inclusive and focus on belonging.
And it's interesting, as we go through, I'm literally thinking of loads of guests where we're touching on loads of things. So it isn't like just something random. This is literally kind of ratifying and summarising loads of podcasts we've discussed and saying, yep, it's all completely true. We need to do this. The research says it works. It's what we all need to do. Thank you for listening to the show. If you are following or please follow us on social media and on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram and now TikTok. Just search for the SENcast and you'll find it. And the SENcast is created and produced by us here at B Squared. B Squared? B Squared. We help show the small steps of progress pupils with SEND make, but do you know about Autism Progress? This is our framework for helping profile a pupil's autism and how it impacts them. It's based on CERT and looks at communication, social interaction, emotional regulation and flexible thinking. And Autism Progress also includes a wide range of strategies to help support the pupils as well. Visit the B Square website or click on the meeting link in the show notes to book a meeting with me to take you through our assessment software and Autism Progress and how it can help you. So thank you for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the SENcast. It is goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me as well.
Bye.